We talk a lot about our warming planet, and for good reason. But what can we learn when the Earth gets colder? We're going to look back at a fascinating period of global cooling to see what urgent and maybe surprising lessons it holds for us today. So I want you to picture this. It's the 1600s, and the River Thames in London, it's frozen solid. I mean, so solid that people are throwing these huge parties right on the ice. They had beer tents, ice bowling, they even set up printing presses out there. They call them frost fairs. Just amazing. Now let's just snap back to our reality. We just lived through the hottest year ever recorded. We're talking almost 1.5 degrees Celsius warmer than the old days. So the very same planet that once froze these massive European rivers is now just shattering heat records one after another. This crazy difference, it just begs the question, right? When the world got colder, what did that actually do to people, to their societies, their politics, and maybe more importantly, what can that story teach us right now? Okay, so to answer that, let's zoom out. We're going to look at the huge ripple effects from this long cold spell, a period that we now call the Little Ice Age. First things first, let's be super clear about what we're talking about. The Little Ice Age, which ran from about 1300 to 1850, wasn't a full-on Hollywood-style ice age. It was a really significant long-term cooling spell, and it hit the Northern Hemisphere especially hard. Now here is the number that should really stop you in your tracks. On average, across the entire Northern Hemisphere, the temperature only dropped by about 0.6 degrees Celsius, less than a single degree. I mean, on paper, that sounds like, well, like nothing, right? Almost trivial. But, and this is really the whole point, that seemingly tiny shift in the global thermostat unleashed absolutely massive, devastating consequences for everyone living through it. And you can see this in a really personal, biological way. When you look at skeletal remains, the data is just undeniable. As the climate got colder and food got harder to find, the average height of European men actually dropped from around 173 centimeters down to 167. People were literally shrinking from generations of malnutrition.
And that was just the start of this terrible domino effect. Colder weather meant harvests failed, which led to widespread famine. Famine created scarcity, which caused food prices to go through the roof. Wheat prices shot up over 300%. And all that economic pain, it just boiled over into social chaos. More wars, more rebellions, and tragically, a desperate search for someone to blame, which led to this horrifying spike in witch hunts.
So those were the long-term trends. But this era was also hit by these sharp, catastrophic shocks. Let's dig into one specific event that shows just how fragile everything had become. So in 1815, this volcano, Mount Tambora, over in Indonesia, just explodes. It was one of the most powerful eruptions in all of recorded history. It threw so much ash into the atmosphere that it literally dimmed the sun, causing this dramatic plunge in global temperatures. The next year, 1816, became infamous. They called it the year without a summer. You had killer frosts in June, even snow, all across North America and Europe. And of course, this led to yet another round of catastrophic crop failures and famine. Back then, the disaster was agricultural. It was frozen fields and starving families. But imagine a Tambora level of event happening today. The impact would be different, but just as serious. Research suggests it would mess with atmospheric circulation so much that it could slash global wind energy production by 9% for 2 years straight. Now think about our modern power grids, which are becoming so reliant on wind. Losing that much power for that long, that would be a massive and, frankly, a really dangerous shock to our entire system. All right, so this brings us to a really critical comparison. The Little Ice Age was driven by natural causes. So how does that stack up against what's happening today? So let's just break this down. The Little Ice Age was caused by this 1-2 punch of lower solar activity and a bunch of volcanic eruptions. Today's warming? Well, that's us. It's driven by our greenhouse gas emissions. And just look at the numbers. CO2 levels were about 280 parts per million back then. Today, they're over 420. But the real kicker here is the speed. That cooling happens slowly, over centuries. Our warming has happened in the blink of an eye, geologically speaking, in just over 150 years. And to put that CO2 number into perspective, scientists can drill into ancient ice cores and look back in time. And what they found is that today's CO2 levels are higher than anything our planet has experienced in at least 800,000 years.
The change we're driving isn't just fast, it's completely off the charts for all of modern human history.
So, after all this, what are the big lessons? What is the little ice age trying to tell us? And maybe the most important question, are we even listening? It really all boils down to three key lessons we just can't afford to ignore. First, those small numbers have huge consequences. We saw how less than a degree of cooling led to chaos, so we should never, ever dismiss a degree or two of warming as no big deal. Second, climate stress is social stress. It pushes societies to their breaking points, towards conflict and scapegoating. And third, resilience isn't automatic. Just because we're technologically advanced doesn't mean we're invincible. This quote really just says it all. In the end, it doesn't really matter why the climate is changing, whether it's volcanoes back then or our emissions today. The real lesson is that any shift, if it's big enough and fast enough, can absolutely tear apart a society that isn't prepared for it. Which leaves us with this one last really challenging question. Yes, of course, we're way wealthier and more technologically advanced than the people who held parties on the frozen Thames. But our global supply chains are so tightly connected. Our agriculture is so just in time. Our energy grids are so complex. All of that creates brand new ways for things to break. So, are we actually more resilient? Or have we just built a much more elaborate, more fragile house of cards? That's the lesson from a cold past that we ignore at our own peril.